My guest for this episode of E-Commerce Connections is Kian Golzari. Kian Golzari is a sourcing expert. I call him a sourcing genius or even a sourcing whisperer. I met Kian back in 2020 and we filmed together a very interesting, very short video on our YouTube channel. And since that day, that video has performed so well, and you've requested from me multiple times to have Kian back on the channel. This time, we're not just gonna be talking to Kian, we're gonna be talking to him and asking him valuable questions that most of you have asked throughout since 2020 until now. Kian has helped and supported numerous businesses, brands, Amazon sellers of all levels. He's been instrumental in sourcing products for people and companies like the Olympics, the NBA, just to name a few. In this episode, we discussed a lot of details that are going to be instrumental and game-changing for your business, whether you are starting out as an Amazon seller and are just looking to source products on Alibaba, or if you are somebody that's currently selling and you're looking at ways to improve your sourcing and lower the costs. How to avoid working with scammy suppliers. Trust me, Kian knows all of this. Kian has lived and worked out of China. He also helps Alibaba and does trainings for suppliers to know how they should be communicating with customers, with sellers like us. What things you need to watch out for, and so many things. So let's dive into the episode. So Kian, for somebody that's starting out, if they're a new seller, and particularly on Amazon, where should they go in order to find their very first supplier?
So there's a wide variety of places you can go to find the right supplier. My starting point would always be like Alibaba.com but it's very, very important how you filter your results there, because there's very, very good suppliers on there, but there's also very bad suppliers on there. So for you to get the best results, it's how you filter that information. So the type of things you want to be looking out for is like how many years have been in business, making sure they're a verified company. And when it's verified, you can see photos and videos of the production line. You can see like what markets they supply, what certificates they have. So we can get a lot of information about a particular factory to qualify them initially. And then if you're looking to look outside of Alibaba, you know, some people, maybe they want to try something else, I would recommend a website called importyeti.com, which shows you public shipping records of the brands that any shipment that goes into the USA, we can get access to their shipping records. So if you want to find the manufacturer of Skims or North Face or anyone like that, we can find them. But it's very, I say it's easy to find the suppliers, but it's difficult to get them to want to work with you, because you can find the best suppliers in the world, which make for the biggest brands, but you have to use leverage. You have to have something that they're like, I want to work with this new company. And there's certain things you can use, like, you know, you can say that you work with a particular influencer, or you have this new idea, or you have an award-winning product, or you have a patent on this product. But if it's like, hey, I want these iPhone cases and I want 200 pieces, they're not that interested, because, you know, they've worked with, they do hundreds of thousands of units. So it's always important that what you bring to the table that makes the supplier want to work with you is very, very important as well. And then, so that's kind of Alibaba, there's Import Yeti, and then there's also like exhibitions in real life as well. So you can go to China and the Canton Fair and Global Sources and shows like that. But a lot of suppliers also come to domestic shows as well. So say you have like a cycling brand, there will be like a cycling exhibition in like Germany, where the biggest brands come there to showcase their new products, but they'll also have a hall for suppliers as well. So I would always check that out to go and see what's trending and what's coming out for next year, see some suppliers. And if you can't make those shows, just go on the website, look at the exhibitor list, and it'll have a list of all the suppliers, and then you can contact them there as well.
That's a very smart tip.
Yeah.
You know, I still to this day hear a lot of people very worried about just sourcing products online and not having physical interactions with manufacturers. So is there a certain, you know, I know you work with Alibaba as well and a lot of manufacturers in China, but is there a certain set of red flags to watch out for when you are communicating with the supplier?
Yeah.
Specifically, if you're not going to an exhibition or
Yeah.
you're not meeting them in person, or maybe you should
Yeah.
like book a ticket and just go and meet them.
For sure. Yeah, it's like, you can talk to suppliers online and they can speak a good game and stuff like that, but you honestly don't know who you're working with
Yeah.
until you actually go there yourself. So I'd always say it's very, very important, if you are serious about placing an order and getting things right first time, that you should go out there and visit the place yourself. So like, if you don't want to, or if you can't afford it right now, one thing you could do is like get your suppliers like WeChat information and just randomly call them, like a video call, right? So during their working hours, let's just say they work from like 9 till 6 in China.
That's so interesting.
I would just call them on a video call at like 11 a.m. when they should be at work, and then like, do they pick up? And then, which most of them will. But then I would just surprise them and be like, hey, I'd love to see the production facility. Can you just take your phone down to the factory floor? I'd love to see how the production line is organized. And if they're like, oh, I'm not in the factory right now, and start to give you excuses, then I would start to dig a little bit deeper into it. But if they're like, yeah, no problem, I'll take you down, I'll show you the production line, here's the sample room, here's where we do the quality checks. I'm like, oh, great, so you actually are who you say you are. So I would do like the video calls, but nothing beats going there in person. And what's quite cool is that I think some people don't consider how much time and money they actually save by going there, right? So I was working on a new product recently, and I've just found some suppliers on Alibaba. I was like, qualified them. I was like, right, these guys look great. And I just took a 5-day trip to China, went to 2 different factories, just saw their entire production line, and I'm like, right. And I worked on the samples there and then, and for 2 solid days, we just knocked out these samples, improved it, and finally like, right, this is the one that we want. But I had like the boss of the factory, the sales girl, the product engineer, the quality production manager, everyone. And like, we all went out for dinner together. We all worked together for like 48 hours in a row and like built up real relationships. And now the product's like good to go. Whereas that honestly would have taken 2 months if I was going back and forth by email. They send the first sample, it's not correct. I would make a video that changes they want to make, then they make it again and they send it back. So you save so much time and money just by going there. Because think about the cost of a sample, right? Cost of the product and then the cost of the freight, it not being right and then doing it again, versus the cost of a plane ticket. Like, you could just go there and get it all done.
And an incredible learning experience as well, if that's the first time you're doing it. So interesting. Now we're supporting tourism in China.
Yeah.
So let's say we constantly have the conversation back and forth, and because all of our audience is possibly based in the Middle East and is looking to sell on Amazon in the Middle East, or is currently selling on Amazon in the Middle East. And we constantly talk about the differences between selling on a mature marketplace like Amazon.com, UK, Germany, and an emerging marketplace like Amazon here in the Middle East. Certainly in emerging marketplaces, you can get away with selling maybe standard products because it's still a new market. There's not a lot of competition, whereas it's possibly impossible to sell just standard products without having anything unique when it comes to selling on Amazon.com, mature marketplaces. How does someone go about, because I know you've had so much experience with this, how does someone go about figuring out what uniqueness to add to their product?
So I like to study the competition, right? Well, first of all, I put the competition aside. If you are like passionate about that product and is that something that you use yourself? For example, if you've got a dog brand and you've got pets, the first thing I would always think is that like, how can I make this better? And the question I always ask myself is, what problem am I solving for the customer? Because if you can say, I am solving this problem, those are generally the products that do the best. But if you're just like changing the color or like changing the size, it's like, it'll do okay, but there's no guarantee that it's going to really take off. But if I'm like, I've solved a problem that no one else has, and you only really get that from using and knowing about the product yourself, right? And if you're not a product user of that particular one, then can you give it to maybe a few influencers or people which are passionate about that product, which can give you suggestions? And then while we develop a lot of products, like bear in mind the factory develops a lot of new products as well. So I always like to lean on their insight as well. So once I've built up a good relationship with the supplier and once we've done a bit of business together, I would ask them, hey, what products are you guys working on for next year? What's working in the Japan market? What are you exporting to Brazil? Looking at my product, is there anything you think you could improve? And sometimes the suppliers give me fantastic suggestions I hadn't thought about myself. So leveraging my own experience plus working for suppliers experience, and then after that, then like studying the competition as well to make sure, and studying the competition in different markets I feel is very important, because they sometimes just do things that we'll never see, because like maybe for that market, like they don't compare against America and Japan and Brazil and stuff like that. So you can get some good ideas that way as well. But I only feel comfortable launching a product when I feel like I've improved on what's already out there. And if I don't feel like I've improved on what's already out there, then I don't feel like confident launching it. But as you said, like in a market like the Middle East, you can probably still get away with that and do okay, because there's not much competition for those particular products. And the other thing as well is that like I always like to develop a product until it's 80% ready, right? Because we can kill ourselves getting it from like 80 to 100 to be like, this has to be the perfect product. Whereas you'll learn a lot from your customers once it's actually launched. So like customers will reply to you to be like, hey, I love this product, but I wish it was suitable for this, or I wish I had this clip, or I wish this bit was waterproof. And you're like, cool. Your customers give you the ideas, and then you add that into your next iteration of product as well.
Yeah. Kian, going back to sourcing, is there a different methodology or different strategies for sourcing different products? Meaning if you want to, for example, sell apparel, or you're sourcing electronics, is it similar across the board, or is there different strategies? Give us your strategies.
Yeah, for sure. So to fast track the whole process, like certain products will have like legal certifications that you need to comply with, and some won't. So for example, a t-shirt, there's no sort of legal requirements that I need to comply with. There might be certain things like a stretch test, a waterproof test, like a fabric test, whatever, but they're not legal requirements. But with anything electronic, like for you to legally sell that, the factory needs to have certification that it's not going to overheat, it's not going to explode or whatever after you've charged it for X amount of hours. So any factories which have already got the certification for that product, it's just you can add your name onto that certificate as long as like you just basically add your brand to the exact same product. But if you make any changes to the product, then you have to get a new certificate, right? And sometimes that testing could be cheap, like $500, or it could be very expensive, like $20,000, depending on how complicated the product is. So certificates are like the first thing that I look at if it's an expensive product. And then the other thing as well is like the size and the weight of the product as well. Because if it's something like, if it's an expensive product, I'm like, well, that's great, because that's a high barrier to entry. So not many other people are going to be looking at like launching this product, right? But then with increased cost comes increased risk, because there's no margin for error. Like if you make a mistake on this product, you have like a $20 product, you've ordered 1,000 units, it's $20,000 order. If there's a mistake, you're like, that's a big cost. But if it's a $2 product, like an iPhone case, 1,000 pieces, $2,000 order. If it goes wrong, it's like, well, it's not great, but it's not a disaster, right? So for that reason, based on the size and the cost of the product, I would use that to think, well, do I need to go out to China? Because like they might say it's going to cost like $750 for the sample and to send it and to stuff like that. And it might be, and I'll give you an example, right? When I first moved to Dubai, I was working on an electronic product, and I just totally forgot that there's different like voltages. And I ordered a device for the kitchen, plugged it in to test it, it just went, just popped, exploded. And I was like, oh shit. And I was like, I spent like $300 on like the sample and like the freight, and I'm like, it's gone now. So I'm like checking like the voltages per market is also like very, very important as well. And I see some sellers make a lot of mistakes there, because I know some brands which buy from factories in China, they sell it in the USA, but they also are selling the same product to customers in UK, Europe. And I'm like, you do know that's not going to work when the customer like orders that product. So checking things like that are very, very important. So you need to have a lot more due diligence, like what are the legal requirements for certification, the cost of the product, like how many rounds of samples you think you might need. Is it more effective to just get a plane ticket and go over there? Are you dealing direct with the factory as well? So those are sort of things that I would consider, whereas you can be a little bit more risky if it's just like apparel. You know, you could even buy apparel from like a trading company, and even if they're adding on like a small margin, well, it's okay because the cost is still quite low. But for maybe a higher ticket item, if someone else is adding on a margin, that might show up as quite a lot, right? So you
brought on the question. You can see it in my eyes.
You lit up when I said
trading companies, exactly. I do have a lot of other questions, but let's just tackle this one. Trading companies, pros and cons of working with a trading company. Because I feel like if you watch a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of people say, oh no, you shouldn't be working with a trading company, they're not good. But with our conversations, you've always taught me that, you know, there's nothing wrong with working with a trading company as long as you know it's a trading company. It's not like a trading company masking itself as the actual supplier or manufacturer. So give me a little bit of a breakdown as to how you would tackle working with either.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a great point because I think a lot of sellers are trying to avoid the trading companies and go direct to the factories. But as a new seller, you might not be ready to go direct to the factory yet. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages of working for a trading company. But as you said, it's very, very important to know which one you're working with, right? So for example, there's this common misconception of, oh, if I work for a trading company, then they're just adding on a higher margin, so I'm not getting the best price.
And they're not doing anything. They're just like,
But the most important thing anyone should be considered with is the price of the product and the quality of the product, right? And if you're happy with the price and you're making enough margin and the quality is good, then you're fine. You don't need to start like cutting them out and going direct to the factory. And you can maybe start to consider that once you get bigger. But initially, if you're happy with the price and you're happy with the quality, then you're fine. Because like certain trading companies, like they have relationships with many different factories, right? So they'll know which factory's got a really low MOQ. They'll know which factory can launch like multiple products. They'll know which factory can give you credit terms. They'll also have like complementary products, right? So let's say you're a fishing brand and you're doing like a fishing vest. Well, they'll know good factories for the fishing stool, for the fishing hook, like for the rods, for the boats, you know? So they can sort of be your gateway into many other factories where it's difficult as a new seller to have those conversations with 5 different factories, like bundle them together. That trading company can do it for you. And typically trading companies will give you lower MOQs because they're placing so much business for other clients to different factories as well. And but with the factories, they're much more likely to give you like better credit terms because they're in control of the supply. They're holding on to the materials, right? But like you might not be ready to get credit terms yet. So that's not something you need right now. So, and I work with plenty of trading companies because sometimes they do a lot of the legwork for you. And so as long as you're happy with the price and the quality, then trading companies are absolutely fine. And a quick hack to sort of find out like whether they are a trading company or a factory is if you're working with them on Alibaba, if you go to company profile and then you go to contact, it has their address. And if you look at the address, if it says like 29th floor downtown Shenzhen, then you're like, well, they're in an office, so most likely a trading company. But if it says like Unit 4 Industrial Zone, Huizhou, just some random province, and you're like, and you can just Google it, put it into Google Maps, and you're like, okay, cool, I can see that's an actual factory. And then doing that thing we talked about earlier, like the surprise calls, if they're in the factory, they can actually show you in real time as well. So
most trading companies do say they are trading companies, but we're talking about the outliers here who are on Alibaba. There's always a margin of people who are, you know, trying to make money in not a very honest way. So,
And also about the price, it's really important because a lot of people think like, oh, my trading company is adding on a margin. But in actual fact, I've seen trading companies sometimes giving the same price as factories because sometimes the trading companies make their money from a kickback from the factory. So the factory takes less profit because if you're a Chinese trading company and you're bringing that factory a lot of business, right? Then the factory's like, well, we need to reward you for bringing us all this business. So as a result, like they actually just pass that like factory price onto you, but the factory give them like 3%, 5% of order value, something like that. So sometimes the price can actually be the same. And certain factories like don't speak English. So sometimes you need a trading company. Some certain factories don't have an export license, so it needs to go through a trading company. So there's a lot of advantages. I would never be put off working with a trading company. The only time I would look away or look at other sources is if I wasn't happy with the price or the quality. But if I'm happy with those things, it's no problem.
Going back to what you were saying regarding, you know, booking a ticket, going to China, is there an alternative to that? Meaning not having to do things online and not having to travel to China. Are there individuals or companies in China which you can hire and say, you know, go to the factory for me, do all of this for me? And if so, how would you deal with such a company?
Yeah, there are. I mean, like I think there's like certain sourcing agencies and stuff like that which would do it for you, but I would never recommend it, especially as a beginner, because I think the buying and the product development is probably the most important aspect of the business. Because if you don't have a good product, then you have nothing to sell, right? Yeah. You might have the best marketing in the world, but as soon as a customer gets the product and they're like, oh, I'm not happy with this, they're not going to speak highly about your company, nor will they be a return customer. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like when you pay a supplier, that is like your biggest cost, like your first initial cost.
Your first upfront cost, yeah.
So you have to be so sure that it's like coming from a reputable source. But what a lot of people don't talk about is like the benefits of such a good relationship with a supplier. But if you work with a sourcing company or if you work with a sourcing agency, they have that relationship. You don't have that relationship. And a lot of sourcing agencies and sourcing companies hide the factory information because they're scared that you will go direct, so they're not transparent. So if you're building a big business that ultimately you want to exit one day, your valuation is much lower when the buyer says, right, where'd you make your goods? They're like, I don't know, like I buy from this company. And the dangers of that is that like your sourcing agent, let's say, is buying a product for $7, right? And if they find a new factory which can make it for $6.50, they'll just pocket that 50-cent saving, and you will never know that you've gone to a weaker factory. Like, you'll never know. So it's really important to sort of understand all of that. And look, if you don't enjoy it or you don't feel like you're not good at it, if you've tried it yourself and then it didn't work, then by all means, just hire one of these companies and see if it works out better for you. But rather than just going to them first, I would always compare it. Like, I'll try and source it myself, and then I'll maybe ask the sourcing agent to do it as well. And if I'm getting better prices than the sourcing agent, then I'm like, well, I'll just continue myself. But the other thing that I mentioned was like about relationships, because there's so many benefits of having a good relationship with your factory. Like, they can give you credit terms, they can introduce new products for you, they can push your item to the front of the production schedule. And like, if Chinese New Year's coming up, they're like, yeah, we'll rush this one for you. So they'll like sometimes develop new products for you and be like, hey, you should try this for your market. Like, a lot of my Chinese suppliers that I work with have become like very, very good friends with them. Like, we go on holiday together. And like, even like one of my suppliers, like, he phoned me up. He's like, hey, like, my son's like 7 years old and like he's struggling with his English homework. And like, he's asked me, and I don't know, he's like, can you just look at his homework real quick? I was like, yeah, no problem. And the question was like, you know, it's like, there, they are, and there, like the 3 different spellings. And he's like, in which instance do you use these words? And he didn't know. I'm like, right, put that one there, put that one there. And I explained it on like a WeChat call. And he was like so thankful, right? So if I'm like a few weeks later, hey bro, I need this sample, no problem, like done, like next day out. Like, so those sort of things like don't really show up on like a balance sheet or anything like that. But those relationships are so important, especially when you're trying to build a business, you know?
Got it. So, you know, we're always talking about positive things, but negative things sometimes do happen. And I'm sure you've got plenty of stories. So let's say you did everything right. Everything was great. You order a product, and at the end of the day, the true test of a product is once you put it in your customer's hands at the end of the day, and once you put it in market. And let's assume you started selling the product and all of a sudden you're getting returns. There's some sort of issue with the product. What would be something that a seller should do? How do they go back to the supplier? Is there something that you can do ahead of time just to make sure that in case something like this happens, whether it's a quality issue or a user error issue, that you could kind of figure it out with the manufacturer?
Yeah, for sure. So like, there's things that we can do to prevent those problems happening in the first place. Like 2 things. So one is like your sample process. I see quite a lot of sellers like, hey, I like this product on Alibaba, I'm going to order it. And then like they find out about the issues like once it arrives in their customer's hands. But you should have like a 3-step sample process, which is your development sample, your pre-production sample, and your pre-shipment sample. So your development sample is like, I've got an idea for this product. I want this, this, and this buckle, this zipper, this webbing, all that. Cool. Sketch it, they make a sample. Yeah, that's about right, but change this, and this. So those are your development samples. And then once you get the sample in your hands that you're like, I am 100% happy with this product, I'm going to give you the purchase order based on this product, and I will give you the 30% deposit based on this product. That's your pre-production sample. Then they do the production, and then they send you what's called like the pre-shipment sample. So this is what you confirm to go into production, and then this is the actual production, and they send you that sample, and you put them side by side. You're like, yep, cool, total match, perfect. Or for something you noticed, well, this label isn't correct or this hang tag isn't right, then they have the chance to fix it while the goods are at source. And a lot of people might say, well, what if they give me the perfect sample, but the actual quality of production is terrible? And that's when you get like a pre-shipment inspection. So you hire a third party, it costs about $200. They'll go in for the full day, they'll give you a 65-page report, and they'll scan the barcodes, they'll open the boxes, they'll like use the products like fit for purpose. They'll verify that all the goods are actually there. If you've ordered 1,000, like 200 in black, yellow, purple, whatever, they're all there, like per color, excellent. And then you then authorize that shipment based on approving that inspection report. But remember, you've only paid the 30% deposit, like you've not paid the remaining balance. So if you read that report and then there's any issues with the production, then you're like, well, now you have to fix this. And the supplier's incentivized to fix it because they're not going to get paid until they fix it. But if you pay for the goods and then ship the goods and then you notice something's wrong, the supplier, like if they're a responsible supplier, which a lot of them are, will come up with a solution and solve it and fix it, right? But they could also say, sorry, like it's done, like it's on the water, and they don't really care about retaining your business, so they could like wash their hands of it. So having that sound sample process plus doing that pre-shipment inspection, and if you want to go a step further, a lot of these companies also do what's called an inline inspection, which they inspect the goods while it's in production as well. So generally when you do that, and you know what we talked about the Alibaba process in terms of making sure the factories are verified, supply the markets that you supply, have all the right certificates, have been in business for like 15, 20 years. Generally, those companies like know very well how to make these products. They've made it for hundreds of different brands. They've been doing it for 20 years. So they've probably made mistakes before with other brands that they now know how they've perfected this product. So those quality like issues like shouldn't emerge. But let's say, for example, you do start to get returns. Sometimes it could be an error on our part that like I didn't communicate that effectively to the supplier, or I didn't put that on my specification sheet. So the supplier missed it, but my instructions weren't good enough. So sometimes we can take responsibility and say, hey, can we split this like 50-50? Like we made a mistake, but also like, you know, you should have known better. So like they can give you some good agreements that way. But normally a return rate I'm okay with is anything below 2%. If I get less than 2% returns, I'm like, it's fine. Like no worries. But anything over 2% needs to be like investigated, right? Because one, it's first of all, how did these faults happen? And let's make sure we like improve it for the next production run. But then I would also claim compensation for those, right? So for example, if we've ordered 1,000 units and I've had like 87 returns, then it's 8.7% returns, which is far too high. And rather than saying, hey, give me the money back for those 87 units or ship me 87 units, I would just say on my next order, I'm going to order 1,000 units again, but ship me 1,087. Like remake the ones which were faulty last time and just send it for free on the next order. And suppliers okay with that because they're like, well, at least I'm getting another order out of this now. Because like they're not going to just make 87 units, stop what they're doing, and it's hard to make 87. Like, they need that economies of scale. So they're like, well, cool, at least I get another order, and then we'll just add on another 87 units. We'll keep the customer happy, and then we'll solve those issues where we had production faults. So that's kind of preventing it, and then also managing it if it happens as well for future orders.
What about from a seller and business perspective? Because I do know a lot of people that are just starting out in the space. They might be even new to business and entrepreneurship. And if this does happen to them, they're like, it's a sign. This was not a good business. I should just get out of it. So how do you deal with it from that sense? Is it it's just a bump in the road and keep going, or should you think like stop, that's it?
You know, it's interesting because like I've talked to like yourself, I've talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of different like e-commerce brands, right? And to the ones which have achieved like significant success, it was never their first product. It was maybe like their second or their third, and like they had issues along the way. They learned from those and they applied those into other products like moving forward. So like I wouldn't even be like disincentivized if something like that happened. If this is a brand that you want to build, then like you have so many options, but it's very, very important to have persistence on a given path. Like if
it's beautiful.
Yeah, like so choose your path. Like this is my North Star, this is my destination, and something happens, right? Well, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to work around it, and here's how we're going to improve it for next time. Cool. And your options would be like, okay, well, do we now need to dump the supplier and work for the next one? Or do we work with the supplier to sort of solve the solutions to make sure this doesn't happen again? Because a supplier which has made a mistake and learned from it is way more valuable than one which hasn't had that issue, because what if that issue then occurs again with the new supplier, right? So I would rather, like, if you have a responsible supplier, they will take responsibility for those issues, right? And I can give you like a wild story, like a few, I don't know, 10 years ago, I was doing a full container full of like backpacks for the UK, right? And these were like outdoor backpacks. And obviously in Scotland it rains almost every day, right? And in our specifications was that the bag has to have like a waterproof coating, like in the lining, right? So the water doesn't pierce through the fabric. And for whatever reason, the factory forgot to add the waterproof lining. And because it was a factory we had done many orders with before, we didn't even, like, we just placed the order, we sent the goods, and that was a mistake on our part. And now we know that every order, no matter how good the supplier is, we still check.
A whole container.
So what happened was we had a container arrive, which we started getting returns, like, this is wet, soaked, waterproof, not waterproof, returned everything, right? So I'm like, we've got 20,000 pieces of bags that we can't sell. And this is a huge order. It's a 6-figure order.
Obviously.
Now, and it's all been paid for. And we went to the supplier and we're like, look, this doesn't have waterproof coating. And the supplier like put their hand up like, sorry, that was my fault. I'm going to fix this. And they made us another 20,000 units at their own cost and shipped it at their own cost. So they took a huge loss on that. But they saw that the cost of that order, the loss of that order, was worth way more in the long term for our business. And that was 10 years ago, and we're still working for that supplier.
Yeah.
And we've done like hundreds of orders since then. So he's made that back up like 10x,
Yeah.
but he had that long-term vision. Now, if a supplier said, sorry, like I'm not going to take responsibility, the cost is too much, then he would have lost us as a customer forever. So, and we would have gone different paths. So sometimes the suppliers are very, very responsible people as well. And that's what I mean about relationships and like going out there, going for dinner together, doing the WeChat calls, helping the kids with homework. Like once you build those relationships up, like you're like people buy from people, like you're really working with good people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Kian, back to people who are just starting out. So let's say somebody, they're just, dabbling, figuring out if this whole e-commerce business is what they want to do. And they're not, placing a custom order. They're finding a product on Alibaba, maybe branding it, maybe like adding their logo on it, maybe creating their own packaging, bundling it, just basic customizations, very basic. What would be someone of that nature or that type of order, what would be something that they should do in order to try to, number one, I know you get this question a lot, lower their MOQ.
Yeah.
And number two, potentially try to get a better cost?
Yeah, so for that's a great question. And
you get it a lot. How many times do people ask you about it?
No, but it's a really good one. And like a lot of people don't consider this, that like they're looking for the biggest and best suppliers, right?
Yeah.
But they're not the best supplier for you when you want that low MOQ.
Yeah.
And like a quick hack, and nobody really talks about this, so I'm really glad you brought it up, was that like when you search on Alibaba.com, you can actually see how many workers they have in the factory. So when you type in under like manufacturers and you type in a product, and as you scroll through the list, before you decide like who to click on, it has number of workers, right? So if you filter this and you see like 800 workers in this factory, 500 workers in this factory, 1,000 workers in this factory, and then one factory has 50 workers. I'm like, well, that's the one which is going to do the low MOQ. Because while I'm a small company now, they're also a small factory, so they're a lot more willing to be agile to my needs. Whereas the factory, which has got like 800 workers, has got maybe like 27 different production lines. They've got very strict processes that they follow. They've got high like MOQ on materials and stuff like that, right? So,
would it be, not to cut you off, but would it be same if the factory on Alibaba hasn't been like working for 20 years or 30 years, maybe also looking for a factory that's been around for maybe 3 or 5 years?
Yeah, I'm skeptical about the factories which haven't been around for too long because they don't necessarily have the experience.
Yeah.
So I would more so look for the number of workers. And if they have like more like higher workforce, that's also good as well. Like, and it's still worth contacting them, but they're less likely to do your low MOQ. But the good thing is, and why I would still reach out to those companies, is that they might hold on to stock. So I would always ask the factory, we can look at how many workers they have, but I would always ask every factory, what materials are you holding in stock? And what items are you holding in stock, right? Because if it's like a regular production and they just always have them in stock, then it's no problem for them to sell you 50 pieces or 100 pieces and just add your logo or make custom packaging for you, but keep the product the same. Or like if they have a lot of materials, so like something I used to ask as well is that like, have you had any cancelled orders recently, right? So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So especially like imagine like during COVID, right? A lot of people were placing large orders and then like shipping crisis and all that, like companies that got into trouble and all that. And then like they would just cancel orders. So like even now today when I go to factories, they'll say that like, hey, I've got this like cotton material in purple that someone cancelled like 3 years ago. I just want this material at my factory. If you take this purple color, like I'll give it to you at less than cost. So like in that instance, if you want that low MOQ, you like use the stuff the factory wants to get rid of, and that could be a good selling feature for you because then you're different. Like that color now attracts on your listing, and it's like different to everyone else who's out there, and you got it at a much lower rate. So I would always like check like how many workers there are, and the less workers there are, the more likely to do a lower MOQ. And then also ask everyone what materials they're holding stock and if they're holding any products, finished products in stock as well.
One thing that we've discussed previously is ask them why they have such a, like, why is their MOQ at 1,000 or 500, which
Yeah.
I thought was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Because sometimes a lot of sellers think, oh, this supplier is just, trying to push me to order 1,000
Yeah.
units versus I just want to do a small order of like a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes a reason.
Very good reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I'm glad you brought it up because
It's your point.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just,
I always want to know why, from my own education, like why is the MOQ the MOQ,
Yeah.
right? So for example, if we see a product that we like, let's just say it's a hairdryer, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I really like this hairdryer. And they're like, what's the MOQ? It's 2,000 pieces.
yes.
Most people are like, oh, it's too high for me. And they just sort of go on to the next supplier. But if you're like, why is it MOQ 2,000 pieces? Well, we have this really nice like custom magnetic box that opens up. It's beautiful packaging. We get it from our packaging supplier. And that packaging supplier, their MOQ is 2,000 pieces. You're like, well, I don't care so much about the packaging. What's the MOQ of the product? Well, 500. Well, great. Order the 2,000 units of packaging and keep them in stock for me. But I'm just going to order 500 units of the product, ship those out, and then for the 1,500 units of packaging remaining, I'll use those on future orders. And if worst case scenario, I never do this product again, then I just paid $2 for the packaging.
Yeah.
It's fine. So with that information, now we're like, oh, okay, this product's good. Or they might tell you it's to do with like the material yardage, to say that like you want this custom goldfish pattern with a watermelon in it. No one else wants that. The minimum fabric yard is 1,000 yards, so it's 1,000 pieces. But if you took this purple material that we have in stock, then we can do 200. Well, I don't mind the purple material. That's okay.
Yeah,
So once
got
we
it.
find out why is the MOQ the MOQ, then we can make better decisions
Yeah.
to see like, well, now we can get a lower MOQ.
Yeah, because they also have MOQs potentially, and
Yeah.
they have costs, of course, because they're a factory. So
and,
yeah,
and a really important point as well is that to always ask the factory when is your high season and when is your low season, because in their high season it's like right before Chinese New Year. It's when they're really busy and they've got many new orders coming in. They're rushing before Chinese New Year, so that's not a good time to be getting like a low MOQ because their production lines are full. But a factory's low season, let's just take example like winter gloves, right? So winter gloves like sell in the winter time. So they're actually being manufactured in like the summertime, in like July, August. That's when they're like in peak season production for winter gloves. But come January, February, all the winter gloves have been developed. And then like if they produce it in January and February, it'll be ready for like April, May, which no one wants winter gloves in. So their low season is in that time. And I've had plenty of factories approach me to be like, hey, Kian, like I'm in my low season right now. If you give me an order, like I just need orders to keep my workers busy because right now I'm paying them a salary, but they don't have any work right now. So if you give me an order right now, I'll produce it at a break-even point. I'm like, interesting. Well, I can produce it right now, and if I don't need it, I'll keep it in their warehouse. I'll put it in my forwarder's warehouse. If I've got my own warehouse in the UK, I'll store it there. So I'm like, well, great. I can get a much lower MOQ and I can get a lower price if I just produce in their low season. So I would always ask a factory, when is your high season and when is your low season?
Yeah.
And then you can get much lower MOQ and prices.
that's
as well.
very interesting. Before we talk about seasonal products and when to prepare for those, because we're coming into a very important season, but what about negotiating prices? Because I find that people, when they're communicating with someone, especially new sellers, especially if they're talking to someone on Alibaba, they're like, no, you have to give it to me at 50%.
Yeah.
So how do you normally negotiate? And is there like a line where that's it, you can't negotiate any further, just move on if the price is not good for you?
Yeah, I feel that the biggest mistake sellers make when negotiating is that they don't actually know what's the real price before they negotiate, right? So for example, if we take like a outdoor furniture camping chair, right? Let's just say the product's $10, right? And then you see an Alibaba listing for $10 and you negotiate it down to 8. You're like, amazing, I got 20% off. I got it from 10 down to 8. Amazing, all right, let's place the order. But you only talk to that one supplier. And what if you talk to 5 suppliers and they were like $6.50, $7.10, $6.90? So you feel amazing because you got it $8, but the real price was actually like in the mid 6s, right? So, and the really important thing is that like you can't just go on Alibaba and say like, what's the price of that? What's the price of that? What's the price of that? Because you're not comparing apples with apples. Everyone's quoting you on different products. So to really understand what the cost of the product is, you have to have a specification sheet of the product that you want. So I will take either like a product that I've developed and say, this camping chair is 40 by 80 centimeters. It's 300D polyester material. It's steel tubing. The thickness of the steel is this. The diameter is this. I've got this anodized powder coating. It must have this certificate. The packaging is this carry bag and this 3x6 hang tag, and the hang tag is this thick, right? Now they're like, we have all the information we need. The logo is embroidered and the logo is 3x6 centimeters. Perfect. So then I find like the top 5 suppliers on Alibaba, Import Yeti, Canton Fair, whatever, and I give them all the same information. And now the pricing will be like 710, 730, 720, 690. And I'm like, well, now I know what the price is. So now I know where I can start to negotiate, right? So if I see a price which is like $9, I know that supplier's just added on way too much margin. And if I see a price which is $5, I'm not an expert negotiator. That price is just too good to be true. And they're going to take some quality shortcuts, which you're going to find out about later on. But through having my specification sheet and finding reputable suppliers and giving them all the same information, I now know what's the ballpark figure of this product, right? So let's say the one supplier gave you $6.90 and another one gave you like $7.70, but you were happiest with the factory which gave you $7.70. You can then like screenshot the quote of $6.90 to say like, look, and send it to the 770 supplier to say that, look, I really want to work with you. Your communication's great. You have all the right certificates. I really like the products that you've done. But just so you know, I've reached out to other suppliers, and other suppliers are offering me around $6.90. You can see this quote here. And if you can match that price, then I'm happy to give you the first order of 1,000 pieces. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes, because you know that $6.90 price is achievable because you've actually received that quote for the same specification. So 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, okay, cool, we can do that. So you've actually got the best price and you've actually got your favorite supplier because you got the market range and you use that as leverage to negotiate. But like I said, if you go to one supplier and you're like, hey, I want 20% off, like they lose respect for you because they're like, on what grounds are you negotiating? Like that is not the real cost of this product. So you are not that knowledgeable about the product. So you're probably not a serious customer.
Yeah.
So, but just by you giving them the right specification, they know that you've done your research on the product that you want. So they're more likely to give you the honest and upfront information like from day one.
The key word here is negotiate, not haggle, not like push someone. It's negotiate.
Yeah.
And obviously, your system means like you need to have like proper tools or data or information in order to negotiate.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So, you know, whenever we're very close to a certain season holiday, and now we're filming this in September, so we're coming really close to Q4 and so many different holidays. So a lot of people think, oh, I should sell Christmas trees or I should sell something related to the season. So when is it, from a sourcing perspective, the right time for you to source things related to a particular holiday or a particular season, Ramadan, Halloween, whatever the season might be?
I think for sure you have to do it like 6 months in advance is when you should start
6 months,
engaging in the discussions, because things always take longer than you expect. Like
just like in life.
If we go off a perfect timeline, right? Let's just say it takes 90 days. And that's just for production, right? Because normally a typical production time is 60 days. It's 30 days material preparation, all the raw materials arrive at a factory, all that. And it's 30 days like cut, sew, assembly, and like quality control, etc. And then let's just allow 30 days for shipping as well. So that's 90 days. But that's 90 days, assuming that we've got the perfect sample, the pre-production sample that we've confirmed. It might take 1 month, it might take 2 months to get that sample that you're like, this is what I'm happy with. So from when you start to reach out to those suppliers, allow yourself like 1 or 2 months to get the perfect sample and quality and price that you're happy with, and then allow yourself 90 days from when you place the order to when you should expect to receive the stock. And then after you receive it, you know, like you have to make sure that you got the right warehouse here and all that fulfillment, tested it out. So realistically, like 6 months before the season selling is when you should really start to get the ball rolling.
Okay. So for anyone watching this, too late for Christmas. Too late. But what about quantity? Because I know specifically if you're a new seller, it's the main reason why we always say don't sell seasonal products, because nobody's buying a Christmas tree in February, you know? So what about quantity? Is there a way to try to gauge or figure out what should be the quantity that you should be ordering for a seasonal product, specifically if this is your first time ever doing something like that?
Yeah. So I think you should like calculate what's like your stock turn, like how many units you're going to sell per month, but also what would be the lead time on your next order. So for example, if we already know, right, 60 days production, 30 days shipment, so it's going to be 90 days until you receive your stock again. So realistically, how many, and you kind of need like a 1 month selling period to get the data. So from when you start selling your stock, you need 4 months to then like get that stock back in, right?
Got it.
So I would be ordering for like, is this going to last me 4 months? And there are certain tools that you can get to figure out like what other brands. So if you're like, I'm pretty sure I could rank number 3, number 5, or I'm pretty sure I could rank on page 1. So these are the other volumes of people which are selling on page 1. So for that reason, this is how much I should order for 4 months stock, right? Because it would be really damaging to go out of stock, but you also don't want to over order that is very costly and you get stuck with it. But other things like as you start to grow and scale, I would consider is what are your container quantities. So how many units can I fit in a 20 foot, in a 40 foot, and a 40 foot high cube? And sometimes I base my orders based on the units that I can fit in a container. Because let's say, for example, you can get like 350 units in a 40 foot high cube, but I've ordered like 400. Well, I'm like, well, 50 units now have to go into an empty container that's going to ship with someone else and they're going to charge me double. So it's like, I'll just like fix it to the container. And I would also talk to your 3PL to say like, how are my goods being stored on pallets, right? What are the pallet dimensions? And if they say the pallet is 100 by 120, then I'll make sure if the factory that my carton dimensions are 60 by 50 by 40. So I know I can perfectly stack like 5 cartons on the bottom of a layer. And then I would ask like the 3PL, what is the pallet height, right? So because some warehouses like have 160 centimeters, like 180 centimeters, like 1.9 meters, 1.4 meters. So that's really important data to know like how many like cartons I can stack, right? So if one warehouse is like 190 centimeters, well, I might make my carton dimensions like 30 centimeters, so I know I can fill it to the top.
Yeah.
But if I made my carton dimensions like 50 centimeters, then I've maybe lost 40 centimeters of space. So that information is really useful, because if you've got 10 pallets and you're paying like $100 per pallet, you've missed out on a whole row of cartons per pallet because you didn't work out the carton dimensions. That's maybe too much information for a beginner. You don't need to think at that level.
Yeah.
But once your orders...
Those are the details, yeah.
Those are the things which will save you 2%, 5%, which really show up as a massive saving as you scale. But like once you've gone from like doing your MOQ of 500 to now you're doing like 2,000 units a month, those are the things that you should start considering, talking to your 3PL, finding out the pallet dimensions, finding out the pallet height, and then working your carton dimensions to fit those exactly so you can really keep your costs tight.
Incredible. I called you the sourcing whisperer for a reason. Kian, I'm going to link your channel, which I love, your YouTube channel, which, you know, you need to pump out some more videos, please. So I'm going to link your channel, of course, in the description box. But I know that you are working on a lot of major projects, but I do know that you have dedicated time to help and support people that are just starting out, building their first business, building their first brand. How can someone reach out to you, and what are you currently working on?
Yeah, for sure. So I do have the YouTube channel, as you mentioned, Sourcing with Kian, so I'd highly recommend just checking out the videos there. I think as a beginner, you'll get a lot of value there. But I do have a sourcing community on School, and there I do weekly calls. I've got courses, I've got documents, templates, forms, all that sort of stuff. So that is just... School with a K, skool.com/sourcing with Kian.
Add it into the description box as well.
Yeah, so if anyone wants like additional help for sourcing and all that, I would check that out.
Or they have to find you somewhere in Dubai where you're working out or hanging out and try to... Not recommend. Don't do it. I'm just kidding. And try to ask you a question, which you're always open to answering. So
yeah, if it's just a quick question as well, like I'm quite active on the socials on Instagram, Kian_JG. So you can reach out to me there if you've got a quick question. Happy to send a quick voice note or something like that.
Thank you so much, Kian.
Cool. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Crystal.